The champagne glass shattered before I did. That's the detail I remember most clearly, not the music stopping, not the gasps. Not even the burning sting spreading across my cheek after my father's hand connected with my face. I remember the champagne glass slipping from my fingers, hitting the marble floor, and exploding into hundreds of tiny crystals that reflected the reception hall lights like scattered stars. For one strange second, everyone stared at the broken glass, then they looked at me, and then they looked at my father. The silence that followed felt alive, heavy, breathing, waiting. I stood frozen in the center of my own wedding reception, while 50 pairs of eyes watched the man who had spent my entire life reminding me that I would never be enough. And somehow. The slap wasn't even the worst thing that happened that night. My name is Olivia Carter, I'm 32 years old, and until 6 months ago I believed I understood exactly who my father was. I was wrong. Growing up, I was never the child my father wanted. He never said those words directly. People like my father rarely do, they don't need to. They communicate disappointment through 1,000 smaller cuts. A sigh when you enter the room, a comparison during dinner, a compliment given to someone else while looking directly at you. My father, Richard Carter, mastered that art. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden child. Everything Ethan did was extraordinary. When he scored a goal in soccer, my father told everyone for weeks. When he got a B on a math test, Dad framed it as proof of his intelligence. When Ethan forgot to take out the trash, it was because he was busy focusing on important things. When I got straight A's, my father asked why there weren't more advanced classes available. When I won a statewide debate competition, he asked if the other schools had weak teams. When I received a full scholarship to college, he told me not to get arrogant. Nothing was ever enough, not because I failed, because I was me. My mother noticed it, everyone noticed it. But nobody challenged it. My mother would squeeze my shoulder and whisper, "You know how your father is," as if that explained everything, as if understanding pain somehow made it hurt less. By 16, I stopped trying to earn his approval. At least that's what I told myself. The truth is uglier. Children never really stop trying, they just become quieter about it. The first person who ever looked at me like I mattered was Daniel, my husband. We met when I was 27. I was working as a financial analyst. He owned a small construction company. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours, our second lasted 6. By the third date, I found myself telling him stories I'd never told anyone, not because he asked, because he listened. There's a difference. People think listening is passive. It isn't. Real listening is one of the rarest acts of love. Daniel listened like every word mattered, like I mattered. The first time he met my family was Thanksgiving. My father spent most of dinner talking about Ethan's latest promotion. When Daniel asked questions about my work, Dad interrupted repeatedly. By dessert, even my mother looked uncomfortable. Driving home that night, Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, silent, thinking. Finally he said, "Does he always do that?" I laughed. A short, bitter laugh. Do what? Pretend you don't exist. The words hit harder than I expected, because hearing it from someone else made it real. I stared out the window. Pretty much, Daniel nodded slowly, then he reached over and squeezed my hand. You deserve better. Simple words, but nobody had ever said them before. We got engaged 18 months later. The happiest day of my life, at least it should have been. When we announced it to my family, my mother cried. My brother congratulated us. My father looked at the ring, then at Daniel. Then back at me. How much debt are you putting yourself into for that thing? That was his response. Not congratulations, not happiness, debt. Daniel smiled politely. It's paid for. Dad nodded. Must be nice. That was it. That was the entire conversation. Later that night, my mother apologized. Again, she spent most of her life apologizing for Richard Carter. I loved her. But eventually I realized something painful. Apologies don't stop damage, they just acknowledge it afterward. Wedding planning should have been fun. Instead, it became another battlefield. Every decision attracted criticism. The venue was too expensive, the flowers were excessive, the guest list was wrong, the menu was impractical. At first I tried involving my father, then I stopped. His opinion never improved anything, it only poisoned the experience. 3 months before the wedding, something happened that I didn't understand at the time. Daniel and my father had a private conversation. I wasn't there. I only knew it happened because both men acted differently afterward. Dad became strangely cautious around Daniel. Daniel became quieter whenever my father was mentioned. I asked about it once. What happened between you two? Daniel looked up from his laptop. Nothing important. I believed him. That was my mistake. The wedding day arrived on a perfect October afternoon. Clear sky, cool air, golden sunlight, the kind of weather photographers dream about. Everything felt magical. My dress fit perfectly, the ceremony went beautifully, people laughed, people cried. For the first time in years I relaxed, even my father behaved, he smiled in pictures, made polite conversation. Stayed calm. I remember thinking maybe things were changing, maybe age had softened him, maybe becoming his daughter instead of his project had finally happened. I should have known better. People don't transform overnight, especially people who have spent decades becoming exactly who they are. The reception began at 6. Dinner was served at 7. The trouble started around 8:30. I was talking with friends near the dance floor when I noticed raised voices. At first I ignored them. Weddings are loud, people drink. Conversations get animated. Then I heard my father's voice and every instinct in my body reacted. Some children never stop recognizing danger, even as adults. I turned. My father stood near the head table, face red, jaw tight, one hand gripping a champagne glass. Across from him stood Daniel, calm, still, watching. Guests had started noticing, small groups turning. Whispering, looking. I crossed the room immediately. What happened? Neither man answered. Dad laughed, not a happy laugh, a sharp, ugly sound. You should ask your husband. My stomach tightened. Daniel met my eyes. For a moment something passed across his face. Concern, calculation, something else I couldn't identify. Then it disappeared. Everything's fine. It wasn't. Everyone knew it wasn't, including him, including me, especially my father. Dad pointed toward Daniel. You think you're smarter than everyone else. Several guests looked away awkwardly. Daniel stayed calm. I'm not doing this here, because you know I'm right. The room had gone noticeably quieter. My heart started pounding. Dad, stop. He ignored me. Of course he did. He always ignored me when an audience was available. Richard Carter loved audiences, he just hated competition, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't the most important man in the room. I grabbed his arm. Dad, firmly, warningly. Enough. He turned toward me. For one brief moment I saw something in his eyes, not anger, not frustration, fear. Then it vanished, replaced by rage. What exactly has he told you? The question confused me. Told me about what? Nobody answered. A terrible feeling settled in my stomach. The feeling that a conversation had been happening around me without my knowledge, a conversation everyone understood except me. Daniel stepped forward. Richard. His voice remained calm. Not today. The words made my father's expression darken instantly. Guests were openly staring now. My mother looked terrified. Ethan had moved closer. Nobody knew what was happening. But everyone understood something was wrong. Very wrong. Then my father said the sentence that changed everything. You think finding those papers gives you power? The room froze. Daniel's jaw tightened just slightly, but I saw it because I was looking. What papers? I asked. Neither man responded. What papers? Silence. My pulse hammered in my ears. My father laughed again. You haven't told her. Daniel looked directly at him. No. Interesting. The smile spreading across Dad's face made my skin crawl because it wasn't confidence. It was desperation pretending to be confidence, and desperate people are dangerous. For the first time all evening, Daniel looked nervous, not scared, nervous. Like a man standing near an explosion and calculating damage. Olivia, his voice softened, we'll talk later. No, absolutely not. I was done being excluded from my own life. Talk about what? Nobody answered. My father took another drink, then another. His hands were shaking. I noticed that, the shaking, and suddenly I realized something terrifying. He wasn't angry because Daniel had discovered something. He was terrified. Anger was just the costume. Fear was underneath. What papers? I asked again. My father stared directly at Daniel. Then smiled, a horrible smile. If she doesn't know by now, maybe she never should. The room somehow became even quieter, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine anger in Daniel's eyes. Not loud anger, not explosive anger, the dangerous kind, the controlled kind, the kind that exists because someone has crossed a line. You need to stop talking. Dad laughed. No. A pause. Then she deserves to know what kind of family she actually came from, and that was the moment I knew, whatever secret existed, it wasn't small, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about embarrassment, it was something bigger, something old, something capable of destroying people, because everyone suddenly looked afraid, including Daniel, including my father. Including my mother, and standing in the center of my wedding reception, surrounded by 50 guests, watching the 3 people closest to me stare at each other like enemies. I realized something horrifying. The biggest lie in my family wasn't the one I'd spent 32 years believing, it was the one nobody had ever told me, and in less than 10 minutes. I was going to learn exactly what that lie was, even if it destroyed everything. The room was silent. 50 guests stood frozen as my father stared at Daniel. For the first time in my life, Richard Carter looked scared, not angry, scared. "What papers?" I asked again. My voice echoed through the reception hall. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then my mother started crying. That was when I knew, whatever the secret was, she already knew. My stomach dropped. "Mom," she covered her face with both hands. "Oh God," my father suddenly stepped forward. "Don't." The word came out desperate. Daniel looked at him calmly. "You should have told her years ago." "Told me what?" I shouted. My father looked away, and that was all the answer I needed, because Richard Carter never looked away, not from anyone, not ever, until that moment. Daniel slowly reached into his suit jacket. Then he pulled out a faded envelope, 30 years old, yellow at the edges, worn by time. My father's face went completely pale. "What is that?" I whispered. Daniel looked at me. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Olivia, Richard isn't your biological father." The room exploded into gasps. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. "What?" My mother broke down completely. My father closed his eyes. Daniel handed me the documents. DNA reports, hospital records, old letters, proof, all of it. 30 years earlier, my mother had been engaged to a military pilot named Michael Hayes, the man she truly loved. He died in a training accident before I was born. Months later, she married Richard. And Richard agreed to raise me as his own, but he never forgave me for existing. Every insult, every comparison, every rejection, every cruel word, it all made sense. I wasn't the daughter he wanted. I was the reminder of the man my mother loved before him. For 32 years he punished me for it. Tears rolled down my face. I looked at my father. "No wonder you hated me." The words hit him harder than any slap ever could. His knees gave out. He collapsed into a chair, looking 20 years older. Broken, defeated. The room remained silent. Nobody defended him, nobody excused him, because everyone finally understood. My father wasn't a victim. He was a man who spent 3 decades hurting an innocent child. A child who had done nothing except be born. Months later, I met Michael Hayes' family. For the first time in my life, I saw people who looked like me. My eyes, my smile, my laugh. Pieces of myself I'd never understood, and something inside me finally healed. I never spoke to Richard again, not because I hated him, because I was finally free. The last thing he ever said to me was, "I'm sorry." For 32 years, that was all I ever wanted, but by then, I didn't need it anymore. I had found the truth. I had found my family. And for the first time in my life, I had found peace.